Mars has a day that lasts for 24 hours and 39 minutes. The human body, when removed from all external cues like no sunlight, no clocks, no social signals, runs on a natural cycle slightly longer than 24 hours. Research in chronobiology puts it at approximately 24.2 hours on average, with many people drifting longer. Every other species on Earth synchronizes naturally to the planet's 24-hour rotation. Humans require daily light exposure to stay entrained to it. Without it, we'll just drift. The planet whose day length most closely matches the human body's natural rhythm isn't Earth, it's Mars. What's coming up is speculative. The documented pieces are real, but the conclusion connecting everything is mine. But I've been looking at this stuff for a while now, and Mars is a place that seems to at least be a piece of the puzzle. What if the Anunnaki weren't aliens from a distant star system? What if they were a civilization that existed on Mars, survived whatever destroyed it, and came here? And what if the creation story in the Sumerian texts isn't mythology about gods making humans from clay? It's a memory of Martian survivors modifying hominids they found here using their own DNA. Which is why modern humans look like them and run on a body clock calibrated to their planet rather than ours. And aren't we trying to get to Mars for the same reasons, to have a habitable planet to go to when things go south here on Earth? So what happened to Mars? Mars wasn't always what it looks like now. NASA confirmed that Mars once had liquid water on its surface, rivers, lakes, possibly oceans. It had a thicker atmosphere and conditions that could support life. Something happened that stripped the atmosphere and ended the liquid water period. The surface is now cold and dry and bombarded with radiation that would kill most of Earth's biology. Solar wind stripping the atmosphere over billions of years is the most popular explanation, but it's probably not the whole answer. A plasma physicist named John Brandenburg, who worked at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, Sandia National Laboratories, and on NASA-related projects, looked at the isotopic data from Mars and arrived at a different ending. The ratio of xenon-129 to other xenon isotopes in the Martian atmosphere is unusually high. It closely matches the signature left by nuclear weapons detonations rather than natural geological processes. The surface shows concentrated deposits of uranium and thorium in the northern plains, close to Cydonia Mensa. He published this in the Journal of Cosmology and presented it at the Lunar and Planetary Science Conference. The mainstream response is that the isotopic anomalies must have geological explanations. But what are those explanations? You can't just state that and not have a reason. What isn't debated is that Mars went from Earth-like to what we see now. Something happened, and the timeline, hundreds of millions of years ago by most geological estimates, though Brandenburg thinks it's more recent based on isotope decay patterns, but they're still working all that out and they really don't know. But if a civilization existed on Mars before whatever happened, they would have had warning. Atmospheric collapse doesn't happen overnight. They would have had time to plan and leave and go to the nearest habitable planet, and it just happened to be right next door. In July 2024, NASA's Perseverance rover collected a sample from a rock named Chiava Falls in an ancient dry riverbed in Jezero Crater. In September 2025, NASA published their analysis in Nature. The sample contained what they called potential biosignatures, substances or structures that may have biological origin. The specific features were leopard spot patterns on the rock surface, chemical signatures consistent with biological processes, and mineral formations that on Earth are almost exclusively produced by microbial activity. NASA was careful with the language. They use words like potential or might or requires further study. But the lead researcher said something worth noting. Either way, the findings demonstrate that notable complex reactions once occurred on Mars. Separate from Chiava Falls, measurements in the mudstones in Jezero Crater showed hundreds of organic detections, described by the research team as the most robust organic detection in Jezero Crater to date. And Curiosity, operating in Gale Crater, found evidence of an ancient lake with low salinity, natural pH, and the chemical conditions necessary to support a microbial biosphere. Evidence of seasonal wet-dry cycling, the same process that drives chemical complexity in early Earth biology, has been confirmed in early Martian sediments. Mars had water, and the chemistry and the conditions. Whether it had life is still being determined. Whether it had something more than microbial life is the question the rover doesn't answer because it wasn't designed to. And then there's Cydonia. In the Cydonia region of Mars, NASA images showed geometric formations that have been debated since the 1970s. A structure that resembles a humanoid face, nearby formations with angular geometry inconsistent with the surrounding terrain. Brandenburg specifically correlates his nuclear explosion sites with Cydonia. The highest uranium and thorium readings on Mars were taken right in the Cydonia region where these structures appear. Planetary scientists say geological processes explain the formations. Brandenburg says the correlation between the nuclear isotope concentrations and the location of possible archaeological sites is not coincidental. And that debate has been running for 50 years and no one can close it. What we know is that Mars had water, it had organic chemistry, it had the conditions for life, and it has regions with both isotopic nuclear anomalies and geometric surface formations that researchers have been arguing about for half a century. The standard reading of the Anunnaki story comes primarily from Zecharia Sitchin. Gods from a planet called Nibiru with a 3,600-year orbit who came to Earth, mined gold, created humans as a workforce, and eventually left. Scholars have been disputing Sitchin's translations extensively. The word Nibiru in the original text refers to a crossing point or a position in the sky, not a habitable planet with an elongated orbit. In 2025, a paper presented at the 4th International Symposium on Megalithic Monuments and Cult Practices went back to the original Mesopotamian sources and proposed something different. A critical review found that the texts don't explicitly describe Nibiru as a habitable world with an elongated orbit. The paper proposed that instead the Anunnaki narrative is a mythologized memory of an advanced civilization originating on Mars, whose atmosphere collapsed in prehistory, and that migration to Earth, resource exploitation, and struggles with adaptation to a new planetary environment were encoded into the myths preserved by early human cultures. What the Sumerian texts describe consistently is beings who came from somewhere else, who understood astronomy and genetics far beyond anything their supposed era should allow, who created humans through a biological process involving themselves and an existing hominid, and who struggled with the Earth's conditions in ways suggesting they were adapting to a different environment. The texts describe Enki, the being credited with creating humans, as living beneath the Earth in a place called Abzu, underground, not in the sky, kind of like someone who came from a planet with a dying atmosphere and learned to live below the surface before making the crossover into a new world. Humans have approximately 223 genes with no clear counterpart to any other species on Earth and no clear evolutionary pathway. This is documented in the Human Genome Project, and the explanation for that is horizontal gene transfer, genes acquired from bacteria over evolutionary time. But that number is unusual, and their distribution concentrates in areas relative to cognitive function. The human accelerated regions, 3,171 sequences of DNA conserved across 500 million years of vertebrate evolution, that then rewrote themselves only in humans, specifically in genes controlling brain development and cognitive function. That's the calling card of the intervention that natural evolution just can't fully account for. If a Martian civilization modified Earth hominids using their own DNA, adding cognitive capability, upgrading their brain development sequences, the result would look exactly like what we find. Accelerated changes in cognitive sequences. A species that emerged cognitively equipped in a window that's too short for gradual evolutionary processes to account for. And our body clock kind of connects all this. If the Martians who came here had evolved over millions of years on a planet with a 24-hour, 39-minute day, and then modified Earth hominids using their own genetic template, the resulting population would inherit a circadian rhythm calibrated to Mars, not Earth. It would need daily light exposure to stay synchronized with the planet whose day is shorter than the one the genome was built for. Every other species on Earth syncs naturally, but humans drift without light exposure, kind of like the body's remembering the planet its genome came from. Every ancient tradition describes beings who came from somewhere else, possessed knowledge far beyond what the surrounding civilization could have developed independently, interacted directly with humans for a period and then withdrew. The Sumerian Anunnaki, the Hindu Devas, the Greek Titans, the Egyptian Natiru. It's the same profile with different names across every continent in every era. If the Anunnaki were actually Martian survivors who came here and modified the hominids that they found, to the modified population, they were gods. They understood astronomy, genetics, construction, agriculture, everything that ancient traditions credit gods with teaching. They came here from the sky. They lived far longer than the humans that they created. They built structures the modified population just could not replicate, and eventually they withdrew. The earlier megalithic structures are much more precise and well-built than the later ones, and that's a bit strange. But here's the part that changes the whole picture. Not all of them withdrew the same way. Some of them integrated. They interbred with the population they created over generations. The divine bloodlines described across ancient traditions, the hybrid kings, the figures who lived for hundreds of years, the lines of rulers described as part human and part something else, those are the record of the original Martian genome diluting across centuries into the broader population. The original Martians became us. But some of them didn't integrate. Some of them stayed separate, stayed underground in the places that Enki built, in the Abzu, beneath the surface of a planet that wasn't theirs, maintaining the subterranean environments that they learned to build before they ever left Mars. And the ones that stayed underground may still be there. Think about what keeps showing up in the documented evidence in these government-released UAP files. UAP operating transmedium, moving between air and water with no resistance, as if the medium is irrelevant. Objects tracked entering and exiting the ocean. Underground base reports from credible witnesses across decades. The entities described across every culture in every era. The beings beneath the hills in the Celtic tradition. The Nagas in Hindu tradition living in underground kingdoms. The jinn in the Islamic tradition occupying a parallel world overlapping ours. They're all described as not quite like us, not quite alien, present but not visible, capable of contact but choosing when to make it. What if they're not choosing to hide because they're afraid of us? What if they're watching what they built, monitoring the hybrid population they created, occasionally intervening? The resets that we documented across civilizational history, the genetic modifications that appear in specific windows, the moments where the right knowledge surfaces in the right mind at the right time. The Anunnaki didn't leave. Half of them became us, and the other half went underground, and they've been there ever since. And the reason we keep finding evidence of something present that we can't fully account for in the UAP data and the contact reports and the ancient traditions is because we're the hybrid population looking for the original population, the ones who stayed separate, the ones who may be watching us right now, monitoring our nuclear facilities to make sure that we don't blow up the planet like they did Mars. There's a lot of sightings and reports around nuclear installations and military bases. So if this wild idea is true and some of the Martian survivors integrated and some stayed separate, what do you think the ones who stayed underground have been doing for the last several thousand years? Or do you think this is just crazy and no life ever existed on Mars? I'm not ruling anything out at this point, to be honest. It makes sense. I mean, look at what we're doing as a civilization. We're preparing to leave this planet and find another habitable planet should things go bad here. Isn't that what a civilization on Mars would do if they were facing the same circumstances? Especially if they think like us, which may be possible if we're all Martians. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate your time. This one was more of a thought experiment of just a crazy idea that I had, which I think there could be something to it, but who really knows? If you haven't done so already, please like, subscribe, and comment on this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, I'll talk to you later.